jack up the truck, and then start spinning the wheel and see if you can hear any obvious noises. I spun this wheel pretty fast earlier, but I don't hear any obvious noises. But when I do this, there's a lot of play in there, which isn't a good sign. Now I'm going to lower the truck again, loosen up the nuts, take the wheel off, and actually access the bearing itself and take a look at that. In order to get the rotor off, we have to remove the brake caliper. Loosen up the two bolts here. You need a 1/2-inch socket to remove the two bolts that hold the brake caliper on. This has to come off in order to get the rotor off. When you take the brake caliper off, it's important that you hang it somewhere because you don't want to put any stress on the brake line. Remove the brake pads. And also go ahead and inspect them to make sure they're still pretty thick. And if they're not, change them while you're in here. Have to remove the rest of the brake assembly to be able to get the rotor off. There's a bolt here, and then there's a bolt up here that takes this part off. That's blocking the rotor from coming off. Remove these two bolts with a 18mm socket. You're going to need a breaker bar for these because they're torqued down pretty tight. Loosen up that lower one, and then this whole thing can come off and get out of the way so you can finally access the rotor. Listen to how it sounds now. That to me sounds like grinding from excessive friction. Still does spin pretty good if the bearing is shot. Okay, there's a little spot right here where I went in the last time. I'm just gonna get the tiny little flathead in there and just pry this cover off. Carefully pry this cover off because you gotta reuse it. You don't want to damage it. You can spin the wheel around as you do it. Remove this cotter pin. And then you have this other piece in here. Wow, look at that. You see that? If at any point the cotter pin snaps when you're bending it, then you're gonna have to replace it. Put it on the side with your other stuff so you don't lose it. This piece comes off, and then there's the actual nut that holds your wheel on. You're gonna need a 1/1/16 socket to get this off. Wow, it's really loose. Make sure the bearing's okay. Look inside there as I slowly spin it. You can actually see the bearing in there. If you don't have the puller, you can get your lug nut wrench and just carefully pry it out. Move it back and forth, and then change the position. Come up here. You can hammer on the rotor from behind too if you want. Just use something to protect the rotor surface. Here's one of the parts of the bearing, just completely destroyed. Be careful doing this because you don't want to damage the outer part here because that's where that cover goes. Once you get enough of the bearings out, then you can pop off the rotor. The rear bearing looks perfectly fine, but the front bearing is completely destroyed. Now that we got this off, we can come behind this stupid part here and just hammer it off till it comes off. There we go, finally. I couldn't find any videos on YouTube that have this type of setup. The bearings actually go inside the rotor directly. And here are the bolts that hold the rim on around. There's the rear bearing. That bearing still looks perfectly fine, but for some reason the front bearing was destroyed. Got the new bearings. Go on just like that. The first one, this little one here, gonna have to hammer it in. The bearings I got, they came with these little caps. They go on like this. I'm not sure if they're actually used in some vehicles. I think they might just be there to protect the bearing. Just get out as much of the old grease as you can. And the bearing fits right in there perfectly, so that's not needed for this. Now we have to start packing in the grease. Then when you get a bunch in there, get the paper towel, go like this. Slide it on. After you get this bearing greased up, then you have to reinstall the rotor before you can put the front bearing in. The rotor in. Get your socket and hammer it in a little bit. Put the washer back on. Get the nut. Now don't tighten the nut too much because then the rotor won't be able to spin. You just want to get it a little snug. That should be good right there. Then put this one back on. Get the cotter pin. Reinsert it. Get the pliers and bend it. Clean out this cap before you put it back on. Lightly tap it back on with the hammer. There you go. Then you have to reinstall the brake caliper.